On March 15th, 44 BC, the Curia of Pompeii became the setting for the most famous political crime in Western history. Gaius Julius Caesar, clad in absolute power as dictator for life, fell under 23 stab wounds. The traditional narrative enshrines this act as the pinnacle of tyrannicide, the desperate defense of the Roman Republic, orchestrated by idealists like Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. They believed they were saving the old order. In reality, they were driving the final stake into the ancient regime. However, in recent decades, historiographical analysis and modern paleopathology have forced a radical reinterpretation: the theory of political suicide. This hypothesis posits that Caesar, the consummate strategist who never lost control, was not a naive victim, but the final architect of his own death. His objective would not have been merely to pass away, but to ensure his immortality and an imperishable legacy through a sudden demise. This existential doubt forces a re-examination of his entire life. The key to this theory lies in the pathological dilemma faced by the most powerful man in Rome. Classical sources such as Suetonius and Plutarch describe Caesar's ailments under the generic term morbus comitialis, traditionally identified as epilepsy. There is at least one record of physical collapse that had direct consequences on the battlefield, specifically during the Battle of Thapsus, demonstrating how his condition could severely interfere with his military capacity and leadership. But modern opinion in paleopathology has gone further. Recent attempts to re-diagnose Caesar suggest the possibility of transient ischemic attacks, TIAs, mini-strokes, or vascular malformations. The distinction between late-onset epilepsy and these other diseases is fundamental to the political analysis. These ailments, or a form of epilepsy affecting cognition, carry a prognosis of progressive mental and physical deterioration. For a leader whose legitimacy was based on his reason and judgment, this prospect of gradual degradation represented an existential threat. Worse than death was the humiliation of an undignified old age, or the loss of control in the face of frailty. Is it possible, then, that Caesar, fearing the loss of his mind, secured his glory by forcing a heroic end at the zenith of his power? This question forces us to trace the path of his life, from his patrician origins to the climax of his omnipotence. The Digital Historian presents Julius Caesar. Gaius Julius Caesar was born in the year 100 BC, a descendant of an old patrician stock that traced its lineage back to Iulus, son of Aeneas. Biographer Jerome Carcopino situates Caesar's formation in the context of the senatorial liquidation that occurred between 78 and 69 BC, a period where the old republic was agonizing before the historical logic of power concentration. His mother, Aurelia, from the family of the Aureli and Cottae, was essential, ensuring her son received rigorous training in Greek and Latin letters that equipped him to stand in the front row, both in peace and in war. However, the young Caesar soon manifested a political audacity that transcended mere personal ambition. His marriage to Cornelia, daughter of Cinna, Marius's successor, aligned him firmly with the Populares faction, openly defying the dictator Lucius Cornelius Sulla. When Sulla ordered Caesar to repudiate Cornelia, Caesar dared to disobey, facing proscription. Although his family's pleas secured a pardon, Sulla, the only one with the perspicacity to see beyond the stereotype of the presumptuous youth, warned his friends with prophetic lucidity. Beware of that boy with the loosely girded tunic. He carries within him many Mariuses. This anecdote is the first proof of Caesar's need for self-determination. The defiance of Sulla was not a simple act of conjugal love, but a refusal to submit to the will of an absolute superior. This character trait, the refusal to accept humiliation or subordination, would consolidate itself as the engine of his career. After Sulla's death, young Caesar traveled to Asia, but his ship was intercepted by Cilician pirates in the Aegean in 75 BC. This incident became a legend that defines his personality. When the pirates proposed a ransom of 20,000 talents, Caesar felt deeply offended, not by the amount, but by the implicit contempt for his worth. He laughed at them and demanded they raise the ransom to 50,000 talents, claiming they did not know whom they had captured. During the 38 days of his captivity on the island of Pharmacusa, Caesar behaved not as a hostage, but as their commander, giving them orders, demanding they listen to his speeches and poems, and threatening from time to time that he would crucify them. The pirates, viewing him as an arrogant and eccentric youth, took it as a joke, but it was no joke. Once released upon delivery of the ransom, Caesar acted with a speed that prefigured his future military strategy. Despite holding no public or military office, he gathered a fleet in Miletus. He returned to the island where he had been held, and after capturing the pirates, fulfilled his promise to crucify them. This act, the immediate execution of his will without mediating legal authority, revealed his character. Caesar did not tolerate disorder or humiliation, and his life would be governed by the need for absolute control and the relentless execution of his designs. This need is essential to understanding his hypothetical strategy of death. If control fails, he must force the outcome, even if that result is his own heroic end. Caesar's path to the consulship of 59 BC was paved by financial cunning and political ambition. The young patrician had accumulated a debt of 1,300 talents before his quaestorship, and his principal creditor was Marcus Licinius Crassus. This dependence, added to the envy and rivalry that existed between Crassus and Gnaeus Pompey Magnus, allowed Caesar to consolidate a secret alliance, the first triumvirate, which would dominate the Republic. Crassus provided the money, Pompey the military prestige following his victories against the pirates and Mithridates, and Caesar the genius and energy to liquidate the Senate. The alliance allowed Caesar to obtain the consulship alongside his detractor, Marcus Calpurnius Bibulus. During his magistracy, Caesar imposed his laws, dismantled the senatorial regime, and at the end of his term obtained extraordinary proconsular command over Cisalpine Gaul, Illyricum, and crucially, Transalpine Gaul. But as his power grew, so did the silent threat undermining him from within. Caesar's health emerges as the factor that, by projecting a risk of future weakness, would act as the psychological engine to force a heroic finale. The hypothesis of political suicide rests on the risk of imminent physical and cognitive deterioration. As mentioned, the collapses Caesar suffered were evident. even in major campaigns, such as at the Battle of Thapsus. Modern debate has nuanced the traditional diagnosis of epilepsy. Re-diagnosis attempts suggest that the seizures and neurological symptoms, such as vertigo or slurred speech, could have been caused by transient ischemic attacks or mini-strokes, which carry the risk of progressive cognitive degradation. This risk had devastating political consequences for an autocrat. If the dictator experienced ailments that compromised his judgment, memory, or strategic capacity, his internal and external enemies would not have to face him. They could simply await his natural fall and the subsequent power vacuum. The real threat was not the dramatic seizure, but the gradual loss of reason. The loss of Caesar's mental acuity would not only have undermined his authority, but would have resulted in unbearable humiliation for a man defined by his genius. The need to preserve reason intact until the end becomes the most powerful driver explaining his active fatalism in 44 BC. The only way to die with judgment intact was to force the end before biology took over. The conquest of Gaul was a classic process of power concentration. For 9 years, Caesar forged his military genius and, above all, absolute loyalty within his army. Caesar's campaigns, from the submission of Gaul to the strategy at Alesia, served not only to extend the Roman Empire, but to create an inexhaustible source of personal wealth. The loot was immense. Gaulish gold was sold at monopoly prices, and thousands of prisoners were sold as slaves, providing Caesar with the necessary funds to finance his path to monarchy. His literary work, Commentaries on the Gallic War, acted as brilliant political propaganda, justifying his imperialism and maintaining his prestige in Rome while eclipsing his rivals. This military force, fanaticized by loot and glory, became his life insurance. The loyalty of his legionaries was personal and unconditional, a fact that would prove decisive when the moment of rupture arrived. The power of the triumvirate was fragile and depended on situational conditions. The first to fall was the emotional bond. The death of his daughter Julia, wife of Pompey, in 54 BC, eliminated the effective link between the two most powerful men in Rome. Caesar capitalized even on this mourning, ensuring that Julia received a public funeral in the Campus Martius, an excessive honor aimed at deifying his own blood and laying the foundations of his monarchical lineage. The second condition fell in 53 BC with the disastrous defeat and death of Crassus at Carrhae at the hands of the Parthians. With the elimination of the economic and political counterweight, Pompey and Caesar were left alone, forcing confrontation. Conflict became inevitable when the Senate, in the hands of Caesar's enemies, sought to strip him of his imperium upon the conclusion of his proconsulship, without allowing him to run for office in absentia. This created a gap of legal non-immunity, where he would be vulnerable to judicial prosecution. The crossing of the Rubicon, dated January 12th, 49 BC, according to the pre-Julian calendar, that small river separating his province from Italy, was not a simple military act, but a declaration of divine right monarchy. Caesar was no longer governed by Roman law, but by a higher destiny. The scene is recounted with a mystical tint. Upon reaching the river, he ordered a herd of horses released as an offering, and did not cross until receiving a divine warning. His exclamation, "Alea e acta est," the die is cast, was the voice of a gambler, trusting in a superior force to justify his act, placing his personal strength and destiny above the legality of the Republic. The civil war that began that day was not to save the Republic, but to establish the new order his genius had conceived. The civil war between 49 and 45 BC was a series of rapid victories defined by Caesar's celerity following the conquest of Italy and Spain. The decisive victory at Pharsalus over Pompey in 48 BC, followed by Thapsus and Munda, made him the absolute master. His political strategy after victory was based on the relentless use of clemency, a deliberate contrast to the bloody prescriptions of Sulla, whose example of power concentration he did adopt. Caesar, for example, burned Pompey's files without reading them after Pharsalus. By pardoning enemies like Brutus, Cassius, and Cicero, and restoring them to their honors, he psychologically disarmed the nobility, eliminating the incentive for exile or resistance to the death, and integrating them into his new order. This clemency, however, must be understood as a psychological trap. By keeping idealist republicans close, free of fear and full of wounded pride, he guaranteed that when the moment came, they would act to affirm their honor, turning his murder into an act of tyrannicide, rather than allowing him to die in passing from illness. After the victory, Caesar became the living law, the very incarnation of power. He accumulated unprecedented honors: Pontifex Maximus, consul multiple times, dictator for life. He instituted profound reforms: the naturalization of Italy, and crucially, the dissolution of the collegia, popular associations that, while they had supported him in the past, now represented a risk of sedition for the autocrat. This act established widespread political conformity. His power was so overwhelming that even after his death, his drafts and unpublished laws were received and adopted with veneration, cementing the framework of the empire for generations. The engine of his final haste was the impending expedition against the Parthian Empire, scheduled for March 18th, 44 BC. Caesar knew that monarchy was necessary to govern the vast Eastern Hellenistic world, and a Sibylline oracle indicated that only a king could defeat the Parthians. The dictator planned to adopt the title of king for foreign affairs, maintaining his status as dictator imperator in Rome so as not to clash with republican tradition. The climax of this quest occurred during the festival of the Lupercalia on February 15th, 44 BC, an incident orchestrated to gauge public support and justify his royalty. Mark Antony, the consul, offered him the diadem, the symbol of monarchy. Caesar rejected it twice, but the act, full of theatricality and selective applause, served its purpose: to consolidate the idea that royalty was a popular and divine necessity. This act of acceptance by the dictator for life, added to the mockery of the frustrated coronation, was interpreted as the final provocation by the defenders of the Republic, guaranteeing that their response would be the extreme violence of tyrannicide. In the days leading up to the Ides of March, Caesar's behavior ceased to be that of a prudent leader and became that of a man chasing a destiny. This active fatalism is the most important piece supporting the thesis of political suicide. Caesar's behaviors are not explained by mere arrogance, but by a strategy to guarantee his own death. The first and most convincing evidence was his decision to dissolve his personal guard, a cohort of Hispanic legionaries. Caesar argued that he preferred to die rather than live in fear. However, in a climate of conspiracy, this act eliminated the only logistical barrier preventing the execution of the plot. Added to this is his systematic rejection of warnings. He dismissed the scroll of Artemidorus, which supposedly detailed the conspiracy, and ignored the soothsayer's predictions about the Ides of March. This refusal to avoid his fate is a manifestation of his decision not to allow illness to reach him before his heroic end. The final link is his famous conversation on the eve of the assassination, the night of March 14th, where he dined with Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. When debated what was the most desirable death, Caesar argued for a sudden and unexpected passing. The next day, the assassination would satisfy exactly this wish. On March 15th, Caesar went to the Curia of Pompey in the Senate, where he was betrayed and stabbed at the foot of his old rival's statue. Despite the surprise, his reaction was one of serene intrepidity. Only upon seeing Brutus, whom he had pardoned and favored among his aggressors, did he utter his famous and heartbreaking exclamation, "You too, my child." The conspirators achieved their immediate objective, tyrannicide. But this act was a profound political irony. Far from restoring the Republic, the crime plunged Rome into new civil wars that culminated in the definitive fall of the senatorial order. The assassination accelerated the birth of the Principate under Octavian Augustus, Caesar's heir. Death in the Senate, dramatic and public, transformed Caesar into a martyr, an indispensable requirement for his divinization. If Caesar orchestrated his death, it was to ensure final victory over his own frailty. He died as dictator for life at age 55, with his reason intact, guaranteeing that his political legacy, the de facto monarchy, and his religious legacy, the divine Julius, were unbreakable. A control that even Octavian had to adopt and nuance. The biography of Julius Caesar, viewed through the lens of the political suicide hypothesis, reveals that his last campaign was not against the Parthians or Pompey, but against old age and illness. From his bold defiance of Sulla to the vengeance against the pirates, his life demonstrated a pathological need to exercise absolute control over his destiny. If Julius Caesar orchestrated his own death, he did not do so out of desperation, but out of strategic calculation. Faced with the prospect of a physical decline that would erase the brilliance of his genius and annul his political legacy, he forced the sudden death he desired, eliminating the logistical barriers, the guard, and psychological barriers, clemency for his assassins. His death was not an error, but a master maneuver. By being assassinated as a tyrant, he became a god, ensuring that his successors, and not the dying Senate, inherited the authority of his name, consolidating the monarchy he had fought to establish. History remembers him for his life, but his political masterpiece was ironically his own death. Thank you for joining us on this journey through ancient Rome. We hope the story of Julius Caesar and the fascinating theory of his political suicide have held your attention. History is not just a record of facts, but a constant debate about human motivations. If you enjoyed this rigorous analysis and want to continue questioning the grand narratives, we invite you to subscribe to The Digital Historian. Leave us a comment telling us which other episode or historical figure you would like us to unearth and analyze with the magnifying glass of evidence. See you in the next chapter.